quick introduction. Hello, everyone. Quick context for why I wanted to have this discussion is because I really think all of us should be actively engaging in making conversations about views and opinions and politics safe and comfortable again. We've gone through several years now where somehow those conversations have become dangerous, and it's like people can't feel safe talking to the closest of friends and family and loved ones because somehow it's become like this feeling of unsafe space to talk about our views. And again, if you've been with me and you've watched like prior videos and you've seen any of my other prior videos, it's always been about the goal isn't ever to be right. The goal is to understand one another. And in that understanding, it makes us more evolved human beings. It makes us have the ability to be more empathetic. It makes us to be stronger actually in our own convictions when we do understand other people's views. Because we feel like we've got a greater education on how not just me or just like a singular community around me feels, but actually how people feel in your local community, your state, your country, and certainly even internationally. So I felt like, hey, timing's perfect. We've got some elections coming up here in the fall for certain positions. We've also, of course, our people are kind of teeing up for running campaigns for the next big presidential election. There's a lot of hot topics happening out there. But I thought a great place to start is actually to address one of the most foundational components of how our political structure is set up in the United States, which is around, and again, this is my opinion, a very archaic system of the party system. And it's something that's been in place. I often question its relevancy in today's day and age and technology and access to information. But nonetheless, I also think that part of what's made a lot of conversation, the feeling of it being unsafe to talk about politics, anything between people, is the fact that there's been, it's become so polarized and we've become so extreme. And in that polarization, I've personally witnessed with a lot of people in my life, and this is from all different views and feelings and aspects of people in a way almost treating a party, the party that they belong to or support, the same way that you would treat their religion, or treat a religion. And so I thought that would be an interesting conversation. There are some different views here. Let's really give, kind of our own individual viewpoints on where the party system is today, and do we in fact either ourselves or have we witnessed in our own experiences the treatment of the party system as a religion. So that's kind of the premise of it. As I always try to do, to share and kind of be vulnerable myself and say, hey, what are the experiences that I've had? What I have personally witnessed with, and this comes across the board, this isn't just exclusively associated with, conservative Republicans. This isn't exclusively associated with self-identified liberal Democrats. I've seen it across the board, that there are people who kind of attach themselves to a party with, again, from a religious perspective, blind faith, right? That they're saying, hey, if this is our party leader or somebody in our party says that this is the way things should be, I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to blindly follow it and agree with it. And there was a lot of that, quite frankly, not just with when Trump was in office, but even since certainly since Biden's been in office, that I've seen that quite a bit, that if that's your leader, then there has been questioning. And then if that's not your leader, there's been like absolute trashing. And if you think about the history of many religions, it ends up resulting in violence and war, because it's like, how dare you say anything negative about our leader? And it's the same again, blind faith, like literal point to hostility and even potentially violence. And certainly the insurrection on the Capitol, we saw that taken to another level in terms of what level of violence that things were taken in their faith and the blind faith that many people had in their belief system. So that's what I personally see, and what makes me question, have people taken their following a party to a level of the same way that they would follow religion? But what's your thoughts on that? I'll just kind of bounce that premise off of you guys and get your thoughts.
So I kind of take it as like a reactionary step of, since religion has kind of taken a step back in the mainstream media, that the people who are religious and want it to be more of a part of the daily flow of life, they combine the two so they have an excuse to talk about it and make it part of everyone else's life as well.
And that's been your experience. Do you feel like what's your view? I mean, you self-identify as a Democrat, so what's your view on how, because you had shared it with me before and I thought it was a really interesting perspective to have in terms of, do you find yourself as someone who like blindly follows the Democratic Party, or do you see it as your ability to influence change? So kind of share that with us in terms of your perspective.
So the way I see it is, since I'm gay, so I self-identify as a Democrat in order to make sure that I continue to have rights in America. And since we're only in a two-party system, while independence still exists, there's not a very good chance of them getting elected. So the best chance for me to have my rights still is to go with a quote-unquote progressive party, which is the Democrat Party. I don't agree with everything that they do, and I don't expect anybody to. But for the main points that are important to me, I will work my hardest to further their goal and then further my goal of to be able to like be a normal person in America. And the way that I see it is, if one party is going to be so extreme, I don't want to say fanaticism, but the energy they put into their belief of their party or like the amount of like self-worth they put into their party almost, then I gotta like counter that with my own, or I will lose something just like we just had leaked out that it's already happening. So yeah.
And I think my takeaway just for the audience's purposes, takeaway that I had when Anthony had shared his kind of view on the party system earlier and where he sat is he, and I feel the same way in many ways, like I'm somebody who was born and raised in a very Catholic family, and I was raised to question. I wasn't raised to just accept blindly people. I actually was raised to believe that like priests are any different than anybody else, like, or to treat them as like these holier than thou, and somehow they're different. They're just men and women who are exactly like every other man and woman. So I questioned a lot, and my view was, even though there's so much, so much that I disagree with when it comes to Catholicism, and so much that I believe that needs to change, instead of choosing to run away from it, I choose to stay and fight. I choose to stay and have a voice. And that's kind of how I related to what Anthony was saying, was even though he doesn't agree with everything that the Democrats do, doesn't necessarily even agree with like all their stances or what their views on various laws, but there's enough there for him to say, okay, I relate enough, and now I want to stay and have a position where I can be an influencer of change. And so that's something I really relate to. Even as someone who is anti-party system, I can relate to it, ironically enough, from my religious perspective. Kristen shared a different view on that, in terms of like both on the religious side and on the party system side. Like, so what's your feelings about that?
So I don't like stereotypes, and I tend to really look at an individual, leaders in particular. I look at every single thing that they stand for, and I don't say, oh, I'm going to follow this person because they're a Republican, I'm going to follow this person because they're a Democrat. I really look at the values and the agendas that they have and what's important to them, and see if it aligns with what's important to me, and hence the reason I'm an independent, because I don't like to affiliate with any party. Hence also the reason why I also am a Catholic. My husband's Catholic, our children are Catholic. It's important to me that we have them go through the sacraments, but I've kind of shied away from going to church because the more I learned about a lot going on there that I don't agree with. So while I admire the stay and fight mentality, it's not really how I tend to be in those situations. I'm like, I don't want to be associated with this, if that's what that means. I don't want to be lumped in that category. I'm very uncomfortable with stereotypes. And so we form our own religion as a family and pick and choose what's important to us. Do we go to church every Sunday? No, but like I said, we do follow the sacraments, or we have, make sure our children go through the sacraments. So I think it's very admirable. It's just not how I historically, not that I'm proud of it, but it's not how I've historically behaved. You'll never see me. I mean, I think my father was a a diehard Republican. He would vote for someone because they were Republican, regardless of what he knew about that person or didn't know about that person. And that, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm like, but what do you know about that person, and do you agree and align with them? I don't know. They're a Republican, so I must. And maybe he did the same sort of things that you're doing, Anthony. Maybe he just said, hey, this one thing is really important to me, and that's Republican, so I'm a Republican, you know? Mm-hmm. Maybe that is what he did, and I think a lot of people now are becoming more and more independent as time goes on.
I think I struggled with that quite a bit, because so many people who I profoundly respected and admired because of their values in so many different aspects of my life, I really struggled to understand, and I really wanted to, but I did struggle to understand how they could support an individual just because they were in a party, despite everything about that individual's character being so polar opposite of who they are. And I'm like, how do you overlook that? I personally can't overlook that. Because I have my views in terms of the party system, I would never overlook that, with any person that I voted for. I don't care if there was, even if politically and from a law perspective, there were so many things that were in alignment with this person. If I found out they're just like a downright dirty person, a terrible, just jerk, and I would still not vote for them. I would not want them to be representing me. I don't want them to represent the country that I belong to. I don't want them representing my family, my friends, and my children. I want someone who I feel is of good character. And in many ways, that will, for me, supersede over how much they're in alignment with a certain party and certain viewpoints on laws, and even certain viewpoints, because people lie like that. I think that's the other part about it too, is if your character sucks and you're just a terrible person all around, but then you go, oh no, but I agree or I disagree with certain platforms, is that really true, or are you just saying that because that's what your party's telling you to say? So that's where I get I just tend to do what Kristen does, which is look it right at the person. But what about you, Hannah? What's your view in terms of have you experienced the party system turning into religion for people?
I think absolutely. I think the thing that worries me a whole lot is individual thought. My grandfather was like your dad, Kristen. He's like, Democrat must be good, all the way down the line when he'd vote. And I came from a family that was heavily into politics. My dad was a lobbyist as well. And so I have seen, very much to your point, Angela, people that have just had this amazing moral character, and there's people that don't. And I think, one of the things that Kristen said that really resonated with me was, I like to look at people for what they are. What are your accomplishments? When I get that voter pamphlet, I'm the nerd that reads through it. I want to know where you stand on things. And yeah, I'm going to pay attention if you've been in the news. I'm going to pay attention at how you voted on something, or, I don't believe in just putting someone through office because they're on their fourth re-election. I want to know what you're doing and what kind of person you are. And for me, I couldn't align with just one party based on that.
Right.
And so every election, when it comes to presidential time, I flip and flop because I struggle with it. There's nobody that's really representing me. If I vote independent, or I know that person's not going to be, our elected official. So it's a struggle for sure.
I think what I hope is with more conversation and kind of people sharing where they've struggled, and how can we start to work towards actually believing change is possible in terms of how our government is structured. I think there's been a lot of complaints, whether it's wanting people in Congress to have terms, right? That they don't just get to be in there forever, as long as they continue to get voted in and run over and over again. That's something I think is, other than people who are in Congress agree with, that you should have terms. And there's just a lot of, I think a lot of people would agree, here it is, 2022. We've obviously come a long way since the original government was formed, to believe that there isn't space for change and a desperate need for change at this point. I would actually align with, and kind of bring this thing full circle, with the same potential issues this country is going to run into as the Catholic Church is running into right now.
Right.
And now there's the first very real risk in the three or let's see here to almost approaching 2,500 year history of the Catholic Church, that because there hasn't been conversations about how do we adapt, how do we change, and that doesn't mean change like the moral fiber of like how a certain religion is set up, and the same thing, it doesn't change the moral fiber of what this country was supposed to be built on, which was equality and an opportunity to work hard to improve your life. That moral fiber, no one's saying has to be threatened or changed, but the how we do it, the how we accomplish that does need to be questioned and challenged and then ultimately changed. And I worry quite a bit now because I say, I could watch in my lifetime the disintegration of the Catholic Church, because there's been no real efforts to have those hard conversations and be willing to make change towards the future instead of just sitting back and looking at exclusively the past.
Right.
And the thing of it is what's the cost? And there's a lot of cost, obviously, on a global scale with the Catholic Church, but here in this country, we could be facing, if there isn't change in the structure of our government and we're not adapting, it could literally be the ruin of the entire country, and so I just think, we got to continue to push and challenge and question. And again, I'll put my personal opinion out there. There is no benefit to anyone when it comes to government, when it comes to laws, when it comes to politics, to be blind followers. There's no place for blind faith. We should question. These are people who are supposed to represent us, and we should know who they are. I'm not saying that anyone is going to be perfect, because Lord knows that doesn't exist, but if you're just a downright twisted crook and you're someone who, doesn't believe in equality, and you're someone who doesn't treat people with respect of all walks of life, and you're supposed to represent me, and you don't have respect for women, or if you don't have respect for people based on, race, ethnicities, sexual and gender, any of that kind of stuff, then they're not the right representation for the country, because they're not actually representing everyone. And so I just, continue to question that, and I encourage everyone to get comfortable and not feel like, even if you disagree, it doesn't have to equate to disrespect. It can actually really come out to an understanding. And I hope, if nothing else, that's what this first, kind of conversation about it. And I'm going to continue to challenge my team to get comfortable with conversations like this. I'm going to encourage other people. Hey, I'd love to engage in a conversation and start to get comfortable with these conversations around politics, especially as we start to head into another hot and heavy election season. And be okay, because I think we have a lot to learn from each other. See you next week. Thanks, everybody.